This is how to fail at AI by ignoring UX. We're going to explore the pitfalls, the patterns, and the smarter ways forward when it comes to integrating AI into your new and existing products and processes. My name is Heather Stevens, and I work for Bitovi. Bitovi is an end-to-end product development consulting agency specializing in consulting, training, and building open source tools. Now, I want to introduce you to the real stars of the show, your experts for today. We have Levi Myers and Mick McGrath. So let's get into the good stuff. Levi, I'm going to turn to you first. I want you to chat with us about some good and bad examples of companies incorporating AI into their UX.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to kick it off. Like, what are the things that really matter? And I'm going to start here with a negative example, which is LinkedIn. At the end of 2023, they introduced this AI-powered prompt questions that would appear at the bottom of posts. And it immediately got a lot of really negative feedback, with people sharing especially stupid suggested prompts like this one on screen here. So even if the prompts were better, though, it would have been a flop because, it's ignoring what users actually want. Most people are coming to LinkedIn to see thoughtful posts. LinkedIn is with this functionality kind of laying bare the prospect that you could be coming and just seeing AI talking with AI. And it's devaluing the entire reason that a lot of people would engage with the content on LinkedIn in the first place. So ultimately, LinkedIn ended up dropping that content, that functionality, but not before it had damaged users' perceptions of the quality of the content that they can find on LinkedIn. With Netflix, their AI recommendations, from what they've released and what analysts have found, it drives an astounding 80% of what people watch. So obviously, the quality of the recommendations plays a huge part in how much people are using it. And people talk about, Netflix knows me better than I know myself kind of thing. But it's also addressing this core desire from users that they want that instant gratification of sit down and find something to watch immediately. So with Netflix, it's kind of that perfect example that they're starting with a business goal that they want to drive engagement and keep people watching. They're aligning it with that user need of people wanting to be able to quickly find something that's intriguing that they can watch. And then they're powering it with an AI tool that does its job just really well.
Mick, I want to chat with you about the concept of tech for tech's sake and your thoughts on this and how it can really lead people down an ineffective path.
Tech for tech's sake, it refers to essentially throwing AI at the problem. We see this a lot where okay, AI is happening, the industry is changing a lot. We're working, for example, with a big telecom company that has lots of different efforts because everybody, industrially, we're sort of incentivized to find ways to get value out of this. A lot of the approaches involve training base models, which are, you incur a lot of costs on GPUs, and they might be still waiting on GPUs in order to train their sort of foundation model. And so this is the hammer approach versus a more streamlined approach where we identify the actual user's needs and identify the goals and KPIs for specific users to make their lives better and give them enhancement. These tools don't have to, they don't have to solve the entire problem all at once. You can sort of present a solution that is a checkpoint that gets them most of the way there. For whatever the thing is the users are doing or needing, maybe you're creating a proposal, maybe you're creating a design, whatever it is. Can you get a response? Can you get a flow that allows you to get much farther, and then you can just sort of tweak that?
And Levi, I think you have a really good example of this that you kind of use.
AI removal tool that Adobe's using, and they've incorporated into a bunch of their products now. It's solving just such a core user need of, people just spend so much time cropping out background or removing an object in the screen. And the tool from Adobe, it just works. And, it's not as good as a professional artist, but, 80% of the people, it's getting them the whole way. For the rest of those people, it's getting them 80% of the way there and saving them a ton of time. I've spent so much of my life just cropping out backgrounds and stuff. So, any tool that's going to be saving me that time, hey, I'm on board to try it.
Yeah. So it sounds like Adobe obviously found a market fit for this remove tool, but can you talk about a little bit when a company is not assessing the market that they're trying to fit the needs of, and how that can kind of fail them.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the UX side of things, this is kind of the most obvious way to fail is not having that market fit. And when I say market, I'm also referring like for internal products, it would be the teams and people that you're focused on internally. But overall, this is such a big one. We've seen stuff like a study of startups that showed 42% of startups failed because of a poor market fit. So such a big impact from this. And all of it really drives out from doing proper discovery work at the beginning of a project. First finding out, is there that shared aligned vision with the project goals? Can the goals be measured? Do we know what success is going to look like? And then, do we know who the users are? Do we know what those users need? Have we identified specific pain points that we can solve with this tool? And then, are we aware of how we can position this with our users so that they're going to be aware of it? They can use it. And then lastly, kind of tying in with that on the positioning side, do we know who our competitors are, what the alternatives are in the same space, and what we need to do that's going to be better than that? One example that I think of with this is Microsoft Cortana. They wanted to compete with, Siri, Alexa, but both of those come with a built-in ecosystem advantage. You got the iPhone, you've got the Echo in people's houses. So Microsoft was left, I guess we'll tie it into Windows, but it wasn't something people were looking for there. It wasn't like they didn't have that killer use case to drive adoption. And that would pull people away from the systems that they were already using there. So it wasn't that Cortana was a bad product, but it was a bad product market fit.
When it comes to things like AI that people get really excited about, the other pitfall we can run into is that concept of unlimited scope. And Mick, as someone who is very excited about AI, how can you tell us a little bit about this and like how it's going to undermine all your projects?
Yeah, this one's tricky. Because it's all fun. Like it's very interesting. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do. And if you're like, let's do AI, then everything looks appealing because like it's all fun. We have a workshop to help mitigate this tendency. And so the idea is, again, identify your users, try to do swift to value, and then you can iterate on quality. And then that way you can identify what your timelines are. You don't have this problem of like, okay, we have all these great ideas. Let's figure out how to integrate this one in and this one in and this one in. Like we have a very streamlined approach. If you identify your users, it gives you a North Star and a path to carve through all of this madness and like, wonderful, interesting things that we can do, and really keeps you focused on what you're trying to do, which is like attract your users and keep your users and make them happy and say good things about you. Stay focused, stay streamlined.
Having those objectives just like nailed down of like, this is the piece we're going to focus on. Harvard Business Review did a study and showed that projects that had those really clearly defined objectives were 3.5 times more likely to succeed. It's not that much work at the beginning of a project to nail that down for 3.5 times more likely to succeed.
Another thing that comes into play with not just AI, but any kind of new technology is, Levi, can you talk about the lack of trust piece that might come when you're trying to implement AI?
People definitely trust AI more if they know why it's giving the result that it's giving. That Netflix example is a great one. It's showing some of those recommendations is, here's why we recommended it, the show that was driving that. Not all the recommendations tie into something like that, but it builds trust that is like, okay, I can see what's the pathway to why they're putting this in front of me. But, there's more to trust also if like they can understand what they can expect for privacy. One example there, Notion AI, they headline like right off the bat that they don't train based on your data. So that's, another good example of just like how to, a small thing to help build some trust there. Another way to build trust, give the user some control. A small example there, most map app, it's going to recommend a route, might show some nice info tying into the transparency side of things of how they got there, it's based on traffic or something like that. But, almost all of them will have some way to give the user some control. You can choose a different route. You can force a route through a specific road or something like that. So that kind of thing helps to build trust as well. Getting consistent results is a big one. Being able to do the same thing over and over again. So Adobe's remove tool, that's another great example there. Like if you use the tool, you don't expect to hit undo and do it again and you get a different result. And the last of these examples is giving users the ability to give feedback. And that's something where most tools are doing pretty good on that. It's pretty ubiquitous to see some feedback mechanisms there. A larger example that kind of ties all those together that wasn't working so well was IBM's Watson for Oncology. So that was a big rollout they were trying to do for cancer treatments with doctors and hospitals, insurance and everything. And so doctors would be using it and it would give them a recommendation, but it was just a total black box. They had no idea what was driving the recommendations. So the doctors were having a lot of trouble trusting that recommendation. It wasn't upfront about the data privacy, which was particularly an issue as they tried to deploy globally because there's privacy laws are different everywhere. Doctors also had really limited ability to customize the recommendations. So they'd get Watson's recommendation, but they couldn't adapt it. They couldn't add their own hospital guidelines or anything like that into it. That was a miss on the trust side. On the consistency front, this was, I was talking about consistency of, trying to make sure it is consistent enough. This was maybe too consistent. They trained around one hospital worth of data, and Mick's going to talk about data issues later, but they trained around one hospital. So when they started rolling it out internationally and to other hospitals, it was really skewed to that just one specific area. So it would do things like it would be recommending drugs that weren't even available in that area. And then on the feedback side, doctors had really limited ability to give feedback. And when they were providing it just directly to IBM, they weren't feeling like that it was helping to retrain the system. They weren't seeing that improve over time. Ultimately, IBM ended up selling off Watson Health entirely, oncology and everything else, after losing hundreds of millions of dollars. So a real cautionary tale with that one.
I wanted to speak, I guess, a little bit to this. There's like a process to gaining trust with AI, and your results might be garbage at first, and we can talk about that in a minute. But like your results for whatever your effort is, whatever your project is, your chatbot, your agent, whatever, where the results are just like not helpful at all. But what that means is that you have a system set up that can give you results, even though they're bad. And so then there are techniques to like increase that quality. And yeah, so I think if you're able to deliver something that's somewhat helpful to begin with, and everybody's doing POCs these days, it's like a great place to start, but you deliver something that's somewhat helpful, and then you have a good feedback mechanism to like bring that in and change it, and then like make sure that your team is able to deliver on those improvements. And so like when they can take feedback, they can incorporate that into the process. They're not trying to boil the ocean with a big solution. They've got a way to incorporate this feedback for the use cases you're trying to deliver for. Another thing to help build trust is disclaimers and sources. So whenever you provide results in whatever AI system you're working with, you might have seen it if you work with ChatGPT and stuff, but it's essentially just like these results could be inaccurate. So treat them with caution. And so just make sure that caution is raised and that the awareness is raised that the hallucinations problem is still a problem. And then we also provide the sources. So like, here is what I think, the bot would be saying, here's what I think. And then here are the sources from which I got the information, so that if anything seems suspect, or even if it seems fine, you go click into the sources and you can review that. And, you can even automate that review if you want. But then also another thing to help build trust is audits. So it's not really black box situation anymore for the most part for how these work, especially in a big, more systems-based approach. A lot of moving pieces, a lot of interactions. All of those connection pieces can be logged, and if any issues happen, you can very clearly demonstrate like the steps that happened and like what the communications were and what the prompts were and all that. And so anyway, there's a lot of techniques that you can do, that you can employ in moving from your small use case and nobody's aware of AI and trusts AI to the point where people and individuals in your organization trust AI can leverage it effectively.
Mick, you've already been alluding to it, so let's get to the good one. Garbage in, garbage out. Talk to us a little bit about the data.
The idea is like, okay, AI is very interesting, but how do we actually get value out of it? And very often the answer is just clean up your data. and then automation is like relatively straightforward, but a lot of problems that you have with, intelligent automations or agents or AI, like giving, improper results and things, is just like, how is your data structured? How to ask good questions is like a real skill. How do you craft the context for an LLM is everything in getting good responses with LLM. So paying attention to your data really does matter a lot, up until the point you can very easily get over-biased data. So overfitted data, that means that you train on like the Watson example, they trained it on like a small subset of potential solutions in a problem space, and it didn't capture the whole space. So that leads to a bias where it doesn't capture all the proper information and leads in proper direction. So like your data matters a lot. Data is everything in context. So context is everything, and the way to craft context is good data and information processes. Yeah, and there was an AWS hiring also had a bit of an overfitting problem with their hiring process. They trained on like a set of resumes that the data set that they trained on was like more heavily weighted towards male. I think that was just because of their hiring processes previously, just sort of inherently led to them having an higher concentration of males. And then if I think Levi, maybe you can even speak to this a little bit more eloquently, but like whenever people would submit resumes, if they were female, they were rejected most likely because the training data on who gets accepted had overwhelmed like predominantly male resumes.
Bias data was obviously driving that, but it was also kind of the black box of how's it actually working. So they weren't seeing that right away, and then they only found it later as they start to do some tests of like, seems like we're getting maybe some biased results here, and then they'd start testing it out, stick in a resume and then an identical resume that has something added in like president of Women's Coding Club, and it's downgraded that one. That's not good. So there was probably a lot of other biases in there as well, just based on the past hiring that they didn't see, but they found like pretty quickly that it was downgrading all of them that used any women-oriented language.
Yeah,
I had mentioned that, that not having the good market fit can lead to like 42% of failures in startups. This is one where there's even more stark data. McKinsey did a study of AI projects and found that 70% of AI projects fail because of data quality issues. So it is so critical.
For our audience, I promise that we're going to get into Bitovi's kind of framework and methodology for avoiding these pitfalls, but it's really important to talk about the non-examples first, right? So we have one more, and Levi, can you speak to the importance of having a change management system in place?
Yeah, for sure. So, not planning for change management is definitely another way to make your AI project fail. And change management is critical on every project, but it can be especially critical on AI projects because there is just so much that can be changed or different than a typical project might be. It might be down to just like stripping out part of the workflow or like a complete change in the workflow of how people are doing things. So yeah, really critical. But yeah, I mean, all the items that I got on screen here, they're all important for every kind of project, but so much with AI. So, if we're, sticking to our theme here of how to fail, just jumping through those, don't have a vision, don't communicate your vision, why you're doing the project. Don't bother with that. Better yet, don't even set a vision in the first place. Don't involve the people who are going to be using the stuff. Keep your leadership hands off, or better yet, publicly skeptical about your project. Don't let people ask questions. Just keep that information completely top down. Definitely don't train anybody. Give it to them. They'll figure it all out. Ignore your company culture. Like don't check in on where people are at or what they might need, help with anything. Also, expect everybody's going to be super enthusiastic. Don't plan for any kind of pushback or anything like that. And then lastly, just like wash your hands of the whole project as soon as you launch. There's no need to track anything long term or see how things are going. You're good.
All right, then Levi, I'm going to put it on you. If AI feels so risky, like what are the ways that we can mitigate those risks as we go?
A major part of the process is risk mitigation, and that's basically what we've been talking about all of today here. Really is helping to ensure success by planning around those failure points. And we focus today on the areas of AI projects where there's that intersection with UX, and that's a critical failure point. There's obviously also a ton of technical failure points. That's not like our core focus today. If you're interested in that, Mick would be super happy to chat with you after the webinar here. Before we get into the core of the process here, part of our kind of mindset with it is the scientific mindset. And yeah, Mick, you want to tell us more about how you approach that?
At Bitovi, we approach our projects in a nicely structured fashion. We estimate our time. We break big problems up into smaller problems and estimate the time for those smaller problems. And when we provide an estimate, we also provide a confidence score. And generally, we say like roughly if it's 80% or above confidence, then we're great. But if it's less confidence than that, then we should probably break off the pieces that we're confident about and take the pieces that we're not confident about and do some science on those. So we essentially say, this is a very uncertain spot. Let's spend some amount of time. You form a hypothesis, get some results, and then use that result to reinforce your confidence until it gets up to the point you can bring it back into the project fold. You want these quick feedback loops so you understand, like, okay, well, this we think it's going to be a good output, but maybe it's not a good output. Turns out it's not a good output. How do we make it better? You iterate quickly and you get that back up to the point where we say, we think we can provide really good outputs in this amount of time. So you can continuously improve your results. Yeah, just like do an experimental mindset and then measure those so that you can know how you're doing and you can adjust. And you can't adjust if you don't measure. So yeah, where there's uncertainty involved, science can help.
Mick, you and I come from completely different backgrounds. Like, you're heavy on the engineering side, I'm on the design side. And you're thinking of, okay, like, let's do this, the scientific method, hypothesis, testing, evaluation. And that is like on the design side, we've got this, like, basically the same process of like ideation, testing, iteration. Like that's core UX, and they mesh together so well.
Yeah, everything's a circle. Everything's just
a circle.
You want to talk about our framework and like our approach?
Yeah, I mean, so this is our framework here. We've adapted it from the classic double diamond design approach, where you've got these alternating processes of divergent thinking, where we're coming up with lots of ideas, and then convergent thinking, where we're taking all of those ideas and refining them down into the best approach. So, in general, it's a way to deal with and refine ambiguity and lack of clarity into a clear path. Taking a look through the process here, starting off, we'd have an opportunity where we're kind of initiating things. We'd work with the business stakeholders, we work with users, identify the needs, the opportunities, the pain points. What are those possible things that we could do? Who's it for? What do they want? And then with that sea of possibilities, we're assessing those against the market, and we're converging on defined goals. And ultimately, we want to come out of that process with clarity, specifically on what we want to solve. So basically, what is that biggest impact that we could have? And with that defined, we want to plan out exactly how we're going to do things. So we're thinking through, like, what can AI do here? How can we test our ideas? And then we're doing things like drafting non-functional flows that we can test, or doing a proof of concept. So getting feedback on the ideas and evaluating which ones are going to be the most viable. And then lastly, actually building it. Obviously, the build process is the longest, the largest of them. But, we're prioritizing the things into tasks, designing and building the interfaces, structuring the data sources, integrating with tools, all the things you associate with building. And of course, we're also setting up ways to measure the goals that we had defined earlier, so that we can evaluate our process. And, this looks super linear. There's some overlap with this too, especially, we want to be starting to think about some of the technical solutions while we're also evaluating the market fit, because that kind of feeds into it. But it's, generally a left to right flow there.
A lot of what we've been talking about is planning. So when you have a project, you've got to plan, you got to implement. And we've been talking about planning this whole time. So this is like the left side of what you see on the screen. And that's really what our workshop is for. Our workshop is essentially 4 hours, can be broken up for ease of scheduling into 1 hour segments. But essentially, it's for a team of 8 to 12 people, business leaders in your organization who have a vision and an understanding of the value flow in your organization. And yeah, we do a knowledge transfer from you to us, the knowledge transfer from us to you, to get an understanding of both your business and you to get an understanding of AI and sort of the current space. And then we identify the use cases that have value to your business based on criteria we all work together to identify the KPIs and things like that. And then we vote on which one you like the most and you think is going to be most valuable. So there's sort of that like high value, low hanging fruit stuff, where to start small, iterate and grow. And then the one that wins, we outline a workflow. We identify the tools and the bottlenecks, the people involved, and the stakeholders and stuff. And you come away with a workflow that has a lot of information that allows you to like really hit the ground running on implementing AI and getting value out of AI. And yeah, it all starts with the user experience. Yeah, if you want to make your users happier, then hit us up for our workshop. We can infuse some valuable AI stuff for you. It's a good process that we keep coming back to. So we're just stick to it. Yeah.
Let's say like a team wants to add AI to an existing product. what's the first thing that they should do before writing a single line of code?
Go talk to the users. It's such a basic core thing. Like, how else are you going to find out like what people actually want, what their needs are, their pain points, like what is going to be something that there's demand for?
It's so easy to hesitate asking people. Like there's quite often hesitation on like reaching out to the people who are doing the work. Like they're busy, they're doing their work and things like that. It's like it's worth reaching out there and like taking that little bit of time, and like the little bit of planning goes a long way, and talking to people is the first part of planning.
You both have alluded to like the intersection between like UX principles and just general like technical or good project management. What's one, Levi, I'm going to talk to you first. What's one UX principle that you think AI product teams tend to overlook?
You're not your user. It's such a core thing, such a common, I guess, instance where you'll start working with a team and advocate, okay, we need to talk with some users. And the feedback is like, we know what the users, I use this myself, or something like that. And, it's neglecting the aspect of things of like, well, the people who are building this tool, they're probably experts. They know the ins and outs. They know like all the decisions that were made in determining what was going to be done. If we're building an AI tool, these are probably AI experts. So understanding that users are going to have a different perspective than the people on the team, different context, different knowledge, and not just substituting the team's knowledge for what people are going to do.
Don't wait for perfection would be my response here. A lot of times teams will, we talked about this before, but a lot of times teams will like try to get to a level of accuracy with their results that really pushes the team to like have to invest more and like test more on. But like you could sidestep a lot of that by having a good disclaimer, saying here's the results, here's our sources, and then giving a good feedback mechanism to allow them to say like, this is actually rubbish. Like, okay, well then we know what to go change, as opposed to like, trying to reinforce stuff without having talked to the real environment. You might be able to shortcut a lot of effort.
I love that. Yeah, those two, like those human touch points, like at the very beginning of the project, of course, but then also in that feedback component to make sure that you can iterate on what you've already created. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a product manager trying to convince leadership that user testing is still essential, even when you're using something as powerful as AI?
This is something I run into all the time here, but for me, it's a no-brainer when you actually look at the data. Like the cost benefit for this is astronomical. The cost of talking to some users, doing a bit of user testing, like you're talking about maybe like a half a day to do some basic stuff. Obviously, you can take longer than that, but that's what you're looking at is kind of at an entry level. And then you compare that to all of the risk that you're taking of designing and building an application. It's probably going to take months, and launching that without having gotten feedback. And then the potential there that it's not a fit, or, we've run into these like core issues that people aren't using it because XYZ. All of that can be avoided with a few hours of upfront work.
Well, thank you so much, Mick and Levi, and to our audience. We really appreciate you. And honestly, we hope that you got everything you needed out of this webinar, right? You got a lot of like real world examples and what not to do versus that framework of really how to set yourself up for success. But today's session is just the beginning. So if you do feel like you need someone to like guide you in this process, especially in those beginning stages, we do have that AI agents workshop, and it's fully customizable, and it's a half-a-day workshop. Like Mick said, you can split it into parts that work for you as well. And we'll work with you directly to help you identify the high impact opportunities that you have to build a practical AI strategy tailor fit to your organization. So if you're serious about turning AI potential into real world value, let's discuss how we can do that. Thank you so much. And thanks again to Mick and Levi. We appreciate your time.